So maybe we can start with you, Alex. We talked about the challenges that we face and the new obstacles we need to overcome and launch above to get orbit. For you, what is the largest challenge you think we need to address now? Now that the Bill 628 is passed, and we have government spending and funding going in this direction, what do you think the next step is?
So, first, there hasn't been sufficient clarity about all of the funding that is needed to get to orbit. We haven't really talked exactly about some of the numbers there, but we do know that it's possible to develop an orbital launch vehicle for around $100 million. Thus far, only around kind of $8-9 million has been allocated per launch company. There's going to need to be more. Not necessarily the full $100 million. You want to be able to incentivize private investment, so there's a certain logic to not necessarily doing the full amount. But when we did the COTS program, to be clear, which was the Commercial Orbital Transportation Systems program at NASA, NASA committed essentially $500 million up front to two companies. One was SpaceX, the other was rocket plane Kistler, which no one has heard of because they went bankrupt. So there are these risks, but the clarity of commitment is still, I think, a little bit to come. The commitment has not been fully that we are going to have this, the amount of money that's going to be allocated over multiple years. There are the signals in there, but I think one of the main pieces that we need to be committing to is the use of these vehicles. So the reason that we were able to build the COTS program and then the CRS program, the Commercial Resupply Services program that combined with COTS, was because we knew we were going to need cargo to the International Space Station, and we could buy that many years into the future. That is the commitment that comes next. The commitment to the purchase of the services of the launches, and then the building of the payloads that will use that. Those two pieces are kind of out there, but we need that much more firmly committed. When are we planning to have these operational? When are the services going to be purchased? How many payloads are we planning to launch per year? What are those payloads? I think we're going to get there. I have full faith in the team that's working this in D&D and the CSA and the government in general, but we don't yet have that quite clearly articulated.
Not just funding, but the commitments and contracts to purchase these vehicles.
And what are we going to be flying on them? What are the vehicles, what are the payloads and the space systems that are going to be flying on those vehicles? Because we need to start funding those now too.
And Eliot, you mentioned that we have to start feeling effect and we have to start pushing it. What are other things that the legislation or
Yeah. Let me just jump off what Alex has said. I think that the single most important thing, and frankly the best way to be tax efficient, so to use the taxpayers' money in the most efficient way, is not actually to give money, it's not to allocate capital. It's to signal to the market. And what Alex is really saying is there needs to be a clear ramp from A, B to C. So if you do A effectively, you go to B. If you go B effectively, you go to C. And I think where the misinformation comes and where you will struggle to get venture external investors is the investor wants to back my technical competence. It doesn't want to have to underwrite the government's commitment or conviction to a path. So we have made this sort of half-pregnant decision to say sovereignty and sovereign launch really matters. We're going to give $8 million. But we actually need to do more. We need to say, if you do this, you get that. If you do that, you get this. That, to me, is the best use of taxpayers' money, because then I can crowd in capital. If I get an $8 million contract, I can go raise $100 million, thereby not necessarily needing to use taxpayer money. So clarity on milestones is really critical.
Yeah, and I'll add a little bit to what Eliot is saying there, because the government has set the signal. The government has set the starting point, but what you now need to have a view of sustainability. It's not just setting up this capability, it is that supply chain that's going to be invigorated and that throughput that's going to last year after year after year. The wonderful thing about launch capability is dual use. You'll have the military that is going to start it and use it at the beginning, but then you need the commercial providers to also actually put their payloads in there, whether it be communication, whether it be domain awareness, and actually begin to pull that through. And Canada also needs to look at its geographical advantage here. Being launching from Nova Scotia, which is our first part, and the other base, means that we hit different orbits, and we hit different areas where other launch capabilities can't go. So we need to play on that. We need to build the demand. We need to sustain the demand. And that's a combination of government to start it, but commercial companies, and in truth, all of us to actually build through and make this happen.
Absolutely. And you know, the view of this title is space sovereignty and security. And something that I believe is part of this sovereignty is our capacity to maintain talent. Because we have the funding, we have the technical know-how, we need talent. And I cannot help myself and look at the human trend on the stage of people games that have gone to the US and have come back. How do you believe we can bring that talent back? I might still be working at SpaceX or rocket labs or companies that attract that talent. We want to bring back here. If you start with Eliot.
Ambitious people want to work for ambitious companies. We need to build the end product. We don't have a systems integrator. We need to build the end product, full stop. If I'm at SpaceX and working on something ambitious like going to Mars, am I going to come back to Canada and work on a valve? No, of course not. Maybe I will because, I don't know, my parents are sick or I want to be close to my sister, but they're not coming back for that. We need to make it the reason for them coming back to work for an ambitious company.
Yeah, and I would build on that. You also need to make it attractive as well. Like, as Eliot says, you know, the sexy programs south of the border, there are sexy programs up here. And those programs will sustain and develop and generate more. There's a bit of a multiplier that's going to happen here. Once you begin to start one and you show it's possible, you're going to attract more and more. And as you begin to stimulate the economy, more and more are going to get involved. And if you're and we need to capitalize on some of the successes we've had. I mean, the Artemis 2 program, we've talked about a lot, but that's put space back in the market of teenagers right now. Those same teenagers, if we can get into the universities around those critical jobs, around those STEM jobs, actually then provide the market to keep them in Canada, that is nothing to sustain the talent here in Canada.
Yeah, I mean, I think Eliot hit it on with the ambition. And for me, orbital space launch is the pointing end of the spear, but we have to articulate 3 to 4 other niche missions that Canada will become world leading in. I even think that we're going to need to really seriously think about what our first robotic scientific interplanetary mission is going to be that is wholly Canadian. We have that capability. There's many companies that can do that can support the planetary scientists who are world leading at many universities, but we need that commitment. And we need commitments to leading in earth science applications as well, because Canada is still one of the Western countries that still believes in the integration of earth science and climate change, and that is a huge opportunity for Canada to lead. And so I think one of the really important pieces about this community is that it has really been the pointing end of the spear on Canadian space ambition in a kind of grassroots way, right? It isn't just the kind of the companies that have kind of been leading Canada for a long time, like MDA and Telesat. It's all new companies. All the new launch companies have only been founded in the last few years, roughly. I think that is something that we need to port over to other sectors as well. We can't use this as kind of being the high watermark. This has got to just be the beginning.
I love that you said that. The people this year, how we have to do this in the industry. We're driving here or Montreal on any road trip. The CRJ and the Mitsubishi, the CC, the Airbus, the Avoir, all these projects that we were meeting in the road, even from Montreal, Bombardier, the trains, there's some places that still say Bombardier. That's French. It's awesome. So maybe going to the commercial side, how do we encourage industry where there are possible exits that can be sold to investors, but still keep that access here in Canada?
Give me money. No, I think, look, I think the answer is industry needs to be taking risks too. I mean, one of the challenges of all legacy companies, and I'm not naming specific names, is that they tend to wait for requirements in large part because they have been told to wait for requirements, and then they compete on the basis of their capabilities. What I would love to see, and obviously what the approach Dominion is taking, is to say, look, I've got conviction about a certain set of capabilities and a future. I'm going to go build that thing. I'm going to get venture money. In fact, I'm going to go get pension money to go build that thing, and then I'm going to come back and say, okay, I've done the thing. Will you give me a chance? So industry needs to take risks as well. This is why I talk a lot about founders and the importance of founder-led country-wide growth. A lot of countries get themselves out of tricky situations or propel through an inflection point principally because of their founders. not necessarily because of the firms and companies. I'll just share a short story. One of the things I was told coming back to Canada was avoid the oligopolies and get the oligarchs on your cap table. What does that sound like? Well, it sounds like the 1870s Gilded Age in the southern US. It's crazy to me that many of those dynamics are still true today. We have a lot of regulation, we have somewhat conservative companies, and we have dominant players that crowd out other spaces. We need to build the insurgents as much as nurture the incumbents.
Yeah, and I think there is a role around speeding up procurement. We've seen some advantages. You have people like Eliot who are just going and doing it, which is phenomenal. But you're also beginning to see standing up of things such as the DIA. What we now need to see is that DIA is actually pulling things forward. And we need to change our mindset, moving from R&D into acquisition much quicker. We need to pull that for the earlier stages of technical readiness and begin to invest and pull things through from 5, 6 to 7, 8, and 9. And that takes commitment, it takes risk, but it also changes the mindset about this is moving beyond research into deployable, mission-ready applications.
I'll just add that I think the list of sovereign capabilities in the DIS, the Defense Industrialization Strategy, is really the core of providing the markets and the demand signals to the commercial companies. But when you look at that list, it's quite a significant list. So which ones are coming first? Mm-hmm. Because in order to succeed at these kind of large-scale commercializations, you need to not think about the kind of $2 million, $3 million grants. You need to think about what's the $1 billion capability that Canada is going to need over the next 5, 10 years. And so the sequencing of which of these ones we think are going to be prioritized, Brigadier General Horner talked about that. He said, Canada's not going to have a system that is thousands of proliferated LEO SSA systems, but it'll definitely probably have a number, and they're going to have a particular capability around maneuverability. What are those particular Canadian systems within those generalized categories of the DIS, and when are they being sequenced? When we get clarity on that, then the entrepreneurs are going to know really what the actual $1 billion scale opportunities are. We're still kind of working that out.
I really like that you mentioned using pension funds to fund those projects, because in the past and the future, you mentioned more flexibility on our procurement process to get as flexible as the project offerings. And so, along all these lines, there's a mention of flexibility and using, changing the way that we're doing things. And one thing that we're doing lately is flexible use, is having projects that are important for national sovereignty, both the commercial side, but also the defense side. And you touched on it a little bit. Can you suggest some more projects that we're in a real space launch, but other ideas that we should start investing in that would be valuable on that process?
Yeah, I mean, SMRs, comms in the Arctic, attritable sensors, small language models. I mean, there's a ton of these things. To be clear, I'm exclusively focused on, we're a single-use company. We may, at some point, have things that are useful for commercial sector, but we are very much a single-use company. I think one of the challenges that we get into, in this country in particular, there's a little bit more of a mature debate in the US, is dual use evolved out of single use becoming dual use, so military going to commercial. What we seem to be talking about here is commercial going into military or defense. That's a very different go-to-market motion. It's actually quite hard to transition from commercial into military because you've got to learn the jargon, procurement, et cetera. Sometimes it's easy, but not always. So I think we need to be careful a little bit about how we talk about dual use. It's not the savior of everything. It is important, though.
Yeah, I'll add one is around quantum. If you think about what quantum is going to be able to do, which is sending messages or signals in a very cryptic way, which is hard to hack. That is what banks are doing. Banks need to move billions of dollars securely between two places instantaneously. that's also a dual use for military signals and also for military communication. So the investment in quantum, which Canada is a world leader, yet we don't tell people that, we have the ability to invest in quantum and quantum technologies, which if we can crack it, is going to actually give us massive advantages in defense, clearly, but also in other ways of life in terms of everything we're doing with regular communications, in terms of transferring things such as funding and position, navigation, and timing.
On-orbit maneuverability systems that are low cost, directed energy, and then AI applications of Earth observation.
And so we all have positions of leadership in your respective roles, and you have great ideas. So what is stopping you individually from executing on those early suggestions?
Nothing. I'm doing it.
I'm open for business. I do think there is a consortia approach which is increasingly valuable, where different parts and different skill sets can come together to solve major challenges. And that is, bringing academia where they have the research and the talent, where you have private equity who have the funding, and you have existing firms that maybe need fractional services, whether it be finance, whether it be procurement. And if you put them together, which we saw in the recent Defense Innovation Secure Hubs, which was released 2 months ago, you're actually deliberately government to put Canadian consortiums together to solve challenges. And I think that should be done more and more, because I think it brings the best of what people can do and forces us together.
I think this is a very good point. Myself and Launch Canada, which is bringing this ecosystem together of companies, students, universities. I have learned more and more about the capabilities of our country, about how we have some of the best manufacturing on planet Earth, how one of the largest aerospace companies come here. The F-35 are making Montreal. So we have 2 minutes left. Maybe if you take a minute to leave us one statement for us to remember on how to ensure Canadian space sovereignty and security.
So I'll repeat something that Chris Hadfield and I wrote in a Globe and Mail op-ed, which is that when we're thinking about our expanded military expenditures, target of 5% by 2035 of GDP, I think it is absolutely vital that we make sure that space expenditures within that are at least 5% of the total D&D spend. If we can achieve that, I think we don't quite get the full scale of what that would mean. By around 2035, that would mean an $8 billion spend on space systems. Maybe we won't get that full amount, but if we can target that and get that level of seriousness out of our nation's industrial capability, Canada will be a world leader in space systems, which I would argue we will need to be to maintain our sovereignty into the future, because fundamentally space is the new front lines. And we need to see space as critical to the country, and we need to see it as an opportunity too. And so we need to understand that the D&D expenditure on this needs to see the space systems as the foundation of our leverage and strength in the future.
I'd love to see more Canadian companies collaborate with each other. Myself and Paul from North Vector Dynamics set up something called Alliance of Canadian Defense Companies, ACDC. AllianceCanada.com for those that are interested. It's 200 members of Canadian companies doing incredible things. Their general feeling has been Canada hasn't been a market, and so they've never collaborated with other Canadian companies. I think we have an enormous opportunity to build Canadian-led consortiums. I'm already doing it with some of these folks, and I know they're collaborating. We have a signal chat that does that. So collaboration among Canadian-controlled, Canadian-owned companies, I think, is really critical.
So about 5 years ago, I believe there was around 4,000 satellites in orbit. To now, there's about 10,000. In the next 5 years, there's probably going to be about 100,000 satellites in orbit. If Canada does not have sovereign launch capability, how are we going to decide how many are we going to put up there? We're going to be reliant on others, and we'll be at the back of the queue. So if we want to have space sovereignty, we need to double down on launch, and we need to control what we're going to put up there. So I think, the reason why we're having this conference is that, but we can control our own destiny by actually filling that critical gap in our ecosystem.
Great.